Do you remember those seaside resorts where summer felt endless and every wave sounded like freedom? For decades, these coastal getaways were where families laughed, lovers met, and America learned to breathe again by the ocean. When did our favorite shores turn silent, waiting for us to come back? Atlantic City, New Jersey was once the beating heart of the East Coast vacation dream, a glittering boardwalk paradise where the smell of saltwater taffy and ocean air meant summer had truly begun. Families strolled along the wooden planks with paper cones of fries, neon lights flickered in the night, and brass bands filled the air with music that seemed to stretch forever. Hotels like the Traymore and the Marlborough Blenheim sparkled with luxury, while the Steel Pier promised endless laughter and dizzying rides. The boardwalk was a living spectacle, women in wide-brimmed hats, men in linen suits, and children clutching carousel prizes as the ocean wind whipped through their hair. Every evening, the horizon blazed with the glow of amusement lights reflected on the waves. Atlantic City felt unstoppable, a place where every summer seemed bigger, brighter, and more alive than the one before. Even the seagulls seemed to sing to the rhythm of the crowd, their cries blending with the music from brass bands and distant carousels. But as the decades passed, the magic began to fade. The boardwalk that once pulsed with life now feels tired, its grandeur weathered by salt and time. Casinos tried to save it in the 1970s, and for a moment they did, but the rush never lasted. You can still hear echoes of its golden age in the creak of the pier and the cry of gulls above the surf. For every broken sign and shuttered storefront, there's a whisper of what once was, a city built on dreams, still waiting for the tide to turn again. Coney Island, New York, was where America first learned how to have fun by the sea. On sweltering summer days, crowds once poured off subway cars, rushing toward the roar of roller coasters and the crash of waves. The scent of hot dogs from Nathan's Famous mixed with popcorn and brine, while barkers shouted over the laughter and music of the boardwalk. It was chaotic, noisy, alive, the original carnival by the sea. In the early 20th century, Coney Island was a wonderland of lights, a dream city that glowed brighter than the stars above it. Families came from every borough to see electric towers that pierced the night sky and performers who seemed larger than life. Couples strolled hand in hand under the flicker of Ferris wheels, believing they were standing at the edge of the future. Even the ocean felt enchanted, shimmering beneath the thousands of colored bulbs that lined the boardwalk. The Wonder Wheel spun against the skyline, and the cyclone dared the brave to scream. Now, much of that noise has quieted into nostalgia. You can still buy a hot dog, still ride the coaster, but the crowds are thinner and the innocence is gone. The magic lingers in the faded signs and peeling paint, like ghosts of a century-old summer that refuses to leave. Every gust of ocean wind carries the same old thrill, a reminder that Coney Island isn't dead, it's just dreaming. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina was once a southern treasure, a place where families packed into station wagons for a week of ocean breeze, sunburn, and saltwater fudge. The wide, sandy beaches were a playground for kids, and every pier was alive with fishing lines and laughter. The smell of suntan lotion mixed with the sweetness of boardwalk taffy as beach music played from tinny speakers. The nights shimmered with energy, the sound of shag music spilling from dance halls and the neon glow bouncing off chrome car bumpers parked along Ocean Boulevard. Souvenir shops stayed open late, selling seashell necklaces and postcards that promised paradise. The ocean breeze carried the scent of fried shrimp, sunscreen, and anticipation, wrapping everyone in the perfect illusion of forever summer. It wasn't just a vacation, it was a tradition, repeated every year like a family ritual. In those days, shag dancing echoed from every beach bar, and neon lights reflected off the polished hoods of Chevrolets parked along Ocean Boulevard. Families lined up for photo booths and souvenir keychains that promised eternal summer. Even the sea seemed friendlier then, bright, familiar, and always ready for another season. But over the years, Myrtle Beach began to sprawl outward. More towers, more traffic, more noise. What was once a laid-back getaway turned into an overbuilt stretch of neon and miniature golf. The small-town warmth that drew generations of families has been buried beneath chain restaurants and souvenir shops. Still, in the quiet mornings when the fog rolls in from the Atlantic and the gulls circle the empty piers, you can feel the heartbeat of the old Myrtle Beach, a simpler, sunnier time that still lives beneath the surface. Daytona Beach, Florida called itself the world's most famous beach, and for decades that wasn't an exaggeration. It was where car engines roared down the sand and spring breakers packed the shoreline in a blur of music and motion. Racing legends like Richard Petty once sped along its hard-packed beach, and families came from across the country just to say they'd touched the same sand. Every night, the skyline shimmered with carnival lights and the sound of surf mixed with laughter and rock music. The boardwalk was a maze of cotton candy stands, penny arcades, and glowing rides that made the sea feel electric. It wasn't just a beach. It was a stage where youth, freedom, and chaos played in endless loops. The boardwalk buzzed with arcades, rides, and bright lights that glimmered across the water at night. But the years have slowed Daytona down. The races moved to tracks, the crowds grew older, and the hotels stand like relics of a wilder time. The beach still stretches wide and golden, but the laughter is softer now, replaced by the hum of nostalgia. When the sun sets behind the old Ferris wheel, you can almost hear the echo of an engine revving somewhere far away. Virginia Beach. Virginia was the picture-perfect family vacation for decades. Minivans lined the motels, kids ran barefoot down the long wooden boardwalk, and the air smelled like fried dough and salt spray. It was clean, safe, and endlessly familiar, a vacation that felt like home. Street performers played saxophones under the glow of string lights, and families would stop to take pictures with giant sand sculptures that seemed almost alive. Rollerbladers zipped past beachgoers clutching snow cones, and every sunset felt like a fireworks finale. For a moment, Virginia Beach wasn't just another stop on the coast. It was the center of the American summer. But as time went on, families began to look elsewhere. Cheap flights to the Caribbean and newer resorts pulled travelers away, leaving Virginia Beach with the memory of its heyday. The boardwalk still buzzes with cyclists and buskers, but the calm is different now, less about excitement and more about reflection. You can walk for miles beside the sea and imagine the crowds that once filled the sand shoulder to shoulder. The ocean hasn't changed, but the energy has shifted. Virginia Beach remains proud, even if it now feels more like a quiet memory than the star of the summer. Asbury Park, New Jersey was once a paradise of rock and roll and restless youth. In the 1970s, its boardwalk bars and shadowy clubs gave rise to a sound that would define a generation. Bands like Bruce Springsteen and Southside Johnny turned the seaside town into a legend. The roller coasters roared nearby, and the carousel music drifted into the night. On summer evenings, the boardwalk would pulse with guitars and laughter as music spilled from every doorway and mingled with the crash of waves. You could smell salt, beer, and freedom in the air, a blend that only Asbury could make. It wasn't just a town. It was an anthem, played loud enough to shake the sea. But after the lights dimmed and the crowds moved on, Asbury Park fell silent. Boarded windows, empty arcades, and graffiti-covered walls told the story of a city that had lost its rhythm. For years, it was little more than a ghost town by the sea. And yet, in that stillness, a new spirit began to stir. Small galleries, coffee shops, and artists breathing life back into the bones. Asbury Park is not what it was, but it's not gone either. Like the tide, it's finding its way back. Ocean City, Maryland was the kind of beach that defined summer on the East Coast. Family-run motels, saltwater taffy shops, and the smell of Old Bay seasoning drifting through the air. The long boardwalk was packed with kids licking ice cream cones that melted too fast, while arcade bells chimed in the distance. Every summer felt endless, a ritual passed from parent to child. You could hear the faint rattle of the Ferris wheel above the crash of waves, see the neon glow of Thrasher's Fries signs flickering into the night. Every evening, crowds gathered for fireworks, their faces lit by red and gold reflections on the sea. Ocean City was a perfect kind of ordinary. The sound, the smell, the warmth, all stitched together into memory. But as travel changed, so did the town. Theme parks and flights abroad drew away the next generation. The neon signs still glow, but the crowds are smaller, the laughter a little softer. Ocean City is still there, still proud of its history, but it lives in two eras, the one you can visit and the one that exists only in memory. Walk the boardwalk at sunset and you'll feel both at once. Wildwood, New Jersey was neon, noise, and pure 1960s joy. Its doo-wop motels stood like pastel dreams under a hot summer sky, each one named after something glamorous. The Caribbean, the Stardust, the Flamingo. Families packed the beaches with umbrellas that looked like rainbows, and the boardwalk came alive at night with screams from roller coasters and the smell of funnel cakes. Elvis played on jukeboxes while kids in swimsuits darted between hot dog stands and souvenir shops. The air buzzed with laughter, love, and 1,000 transistor radios tuned to summer. It was America's Golden Beach dream, loud, colorful, and alive. For a long time, it felt like the happiest place on earth. But time moved on, and the glitter began to fade. Some motels fell to condos, some signs went dark, and the neon glow dimmed. Still, Wildwood refuses to die. It clings to its mid-century magic with pride, a living time capsule of surf rock, car shows, and cotton candy summers. To walk its boardwalk today is to travel through time, loud, bright, and full of heart. Revere Beach, Massachusetts was America's first public beach, a place where city dwellers escaped by trolley to feel the ocean breeze for the first time. In the early 1900s, it was a wonderland of roller coasters, dance halls, and open-air theaters. The laughter and music rolled over the waves like a celebration of freedom. Families spent entire days here, eating saltwater clams and watching the lights come alive after sunset. The beach was a carnival of dreams. Fortune tellers, carousel horses, and cotton candy clouds against a pink sky. Every sound, every scent, every spark felt alive, as if the whole city had gathered to breathe. Revere wasn't just a beach, it was Boston's heartbeat by the sea. But the golden age faded. Fires, storms, and shifting tastes left the beach quieter, the amusements gone. What remains is a wide, simple stretch of sand, watched over by gulls and memory. Revere Beach may have traded its carnival past for calm reflection, but it still carries the spirit of those long, carefree days when the sea first belonged to everyone. Seaside Heights, New Jersey, was the heart of summer for generations of East Coast families. Kids ran barefoot across the hot sand, clutching paper tickets for rides that seemed to scrape the clouds. The smell of fries, salt water, and suntan lotion filled the air, while laughter echoed from the arcades. The pier pulsed with music, the sound of pop songs mixing with the crash of waves beneath the wooden planks. Teenagers rode the tilt-a-whirl while seagulls circled overhead, waiting for a fallen fry. It was raw, joyful chaos, and it belonged to everyone. For years, it was perfection, until the crowds grew too heavy and the storms too strong. Over-tourism dulled the charm, and Hurricane Sandy nearly washed it all away. The rebuilt boardwalk still stands, newer but quieter, its joy tempered by memory. Today, Seaside Heights is both old and new, a place reborn from ruin, carrying the ghosts of its golden age with grace. On a still night, when the waves crash just right, you can almost hear the boardwalk come alive again. Cape May, New Jersey is where American seaside history began. Its grand Victorian hotels, painted in pastel hues, still line the coast like ghosts of another time, elegant, patient, and watching the waves. In the 1800s, this was where the country's elite came to breathe ocean air and escape the city's grit. The smell of salt and wood mingled with perfume and cigar smoke as carriages rolled down the streets. But when railroads made travel easier and new destinations rose, Cape May became a postcard of its former glory. Fires and storms took their toll, yet the town refused to vanish. Today, Its ornate architecture and quiet promenades feel like a step back in time, a living museum of leisure and grace. The hotels stand proud but wistful, their wraparound porches now framing sunsets instead of grand arrivals. Cape May is no longer America's playground. It's America's memory, still standing at the edge of the Atlantic, waiting for the next chapter to arrive with the tide. Rockaway Beach, New York, once roared with life. Families from Queens and Brooklyn crowding the sand, radios blaring, lifeguards' whistles slicing through the summer air. The boardwalk was lined with snack stands and arcades, the smell of fried dough and salt water thick in the heat. For working-class New Yorkers, Rockaway was paradise within reach, a subway ride away from the grind. But as the decades passed, storms battered the shoreline and the crowds began to thin. Highways made faraway beaches easier to reach, and the Rockaways faded from the city's imagination. Still, there's something hauntingly beautiful about its resilience. The waves crashed the same way they always have, and the boardwalk has been rebuilt with love and grit. Today, surfers share the shore with families carrying coolers and folding chairs, keeping the spirit of the old beach alive in every laugh and splash. The noise may have quieted, but the heartbeat of Rockaway never stopped. It just slowed to the rhythm of the tide. Tybee Island, Georgia, was once Savannah's pride, a peaceful stretch of beach where families spent lazy afternoons in wicker chairs watching shrimp boats drift by. The old pavilion played music through the humid air, and the smell of salt, suntan oil, and fried crab cakes clung to every breeze. It was a vacation spot built on simplicity, sand castles, bike rides, and long sunsets over the marshes. But as larger, flashier destinations rose nearby, Tybee Island slipped into the background. Its wooden cottages weathered, its crowds thinned, and the nightlife faded into memory. What remains today is a sleepy island that feels untouched by time. You can still walk the same narrow streets and hear the echo of laughter carried by the wind. There's no glitz, no spectacle, just quiet beauty and a sense that the island prefers it that way. Tybee Island may have stepped out of the spotlight, but it kept its soul, soft, slow, and utterly southern. Biloxi, Mississippi, was once the Gulf Coast's crown jewel, a place where wooden piers stretched into warm blue water and seafood restaurants overflowed with laughter. Before casinos lined the shore, it was a simple, shining world of fishing boats, jazz bands, and family picnics. The beach buzzed with life, and the hotels glowed under the golden southern sun. At night, the boardwalk came alive with music spilling from every cafe, the scent of oysters and gumbo drifting through the humid air. Families danced barefoot in the sand, while street musicians played blues that carried across the Gulf. Those evenings were Biloxi at its most alive, warm, loud, and full of heart. But the storms came, Camille, then Katrina, reshaping both the landscape and the town's identity. The old piers were torn apart, and the elegant resorts that once defined Biloxi gave way to bright casino lights. The sound of waves mixed with the chime of slot machines, and something softer was lost in the noise. Yet if you stand at the water's edge, you can still feel the Biloxi that was. The laughter, the resilience, the smell of salt and shrimp on the wind. Beneath the glitter of casinos, the heartbeat of the old beach still lingers, patient and proud. Gulf Shores, Alabama was a family road trip dream long before it became a luxury playground. In the 1970s, station wagons lined the dunes, and kids built sandcastles beside parents grilling fresh fish on portable barbecues. The beaches were quiet, the water impossibly clear, and time seemed to move slower there. You could stop at a bait shop that doubled as a diner, grab a burger for $1, and listen to fishermen tell stories while gulls cried overhead. At night, campfires flickered across the shore as radios hummed soft country songs in the distance. It was the kind of simple joy that never needed postcards or luxury hotels to feel perfect. But word spread, and the sleepy seaside town changed. Towers rose, traffic followed, and the gentle charm that once defined Gulf Shores became a memory beneath the concrete. Yet when you find the right spot, maybe a stretch of untouched sand at sunrise, you can still glimpse the old Gulf shores, where simplicity reigned and the only sound was the surf. For many Southerners, it's not the condos they remember, but the coolers, the laughter, and the way the air smelled just before a summer storm. Gulf Shores has grown up, but the heart of those old family vacations still whispers through every wave. Pensacola Beach. Florida was never flashy, and that was the point. It was the place military families escaped to, a long white stretch of calm where laughter carried on the wind and time didn't matter. Kids built forts out of driftwood while parents watched from striped chairs, the smell of sunscreen and salt water in the air. Every summer weekend felt the same. Ice chests in the sand, radios playing classic rock, and the steady thump of waves just beyond your toes. Evenings brought beachside fireworks and slow walks down the pier, hand in hand under strings of lights. There was no hurry, no rush, just the kind of peace that stays with you long after you've left. The turquoise water sparkled under the Gulf sun, and the wooden pier stretched into forever. But as Florida's coastline became lined with bigger cities and pricier resorts, Pensacola quietly faded into the background. The charm never disappeared. It just grew quieter, more personal. Even today, you can drive across the bridge, roll down your windows, and feel like you've entered another era. Pensacola Beach remains loyal to what made it special: family, simplicity, and sea air that feels like home. St. Augustine Beach, Florida, is the kind of place where time moves differently. Just over the bridge from America's oldest city, it once overflowed with tourists drawn to its old-world charm and easy calm. Families spent entire days wading in the shallow surf, walking back to beach motels where the walls smelled faintly of salt and sunscreen. Back then, the rhythm of the day was slow and unhurried. Mornings at the beach, afternoons exploring old forts, and evenings spent on motel balconies under the hum of neon lights. Locals sold seashell necklaces and hand-drawn postcards that captured the town's vintage magic. Even today, the same sea breeze carries whispers of those simpler golden summers. But as Florida grew louder, more parks, more glitz, more crowds, St. Augustine Beach stayed humble. Its charm wasn't in the noise, but in the stillness, in the way the sky turned gold every evening over the dunes. Some say it's been forgotten, others say it's been spared. The motels are smaller, the restaurants family-owned, and the laughter softer, just the way it used to be. St. Augustine Beach didn't chase the spotlight, and that's why it still feels like a secret worth keeping. Galveston, Texas once glittered like the Southern Riviera. In the late 1800s, it was where high society came to stroll along the seawall, dance in grand hotels, and watch the Gulf shimmer under gaslight. The Hotel Galvez stood like a palace over the sand, welcoming everyone from presidents to poets. Horse-drawn carriages lined the promenade, and orchestras played inside lavish ballrooms that echoed with laughter and champagne toasts. Families in white linen gathered for seaside picnics while elegant women shaded themselves beneath silk parasols. It was a city of salt, silk, and ambition, a jewel of the Gulf unlike any other. But hurricanes came, and progress marched on, leaving Galveston changed forever. The grand buildings aged, the piers cracked, and the town's grandeur faded beneath the weight of time. Yet even now, there's something hauntingly elegant about it. The sea breeze carries stories of laughter and loss, and the historic district glows with the resilience of a city that's been rebuilt more than once. Galveston isn't trying to be what it was. It's proud of its scars. The waves still crash against the seawall, and the ghosts of its golden age still dance in the salty wind. South Padre Island, Texas began as a quiet Gulf Coast escape, dunes, surf, and skies that stretched forever. It was a place for long walks, fishing at sunrise, and quiet dinners by the water. Families came here to breathe, to feel the rhythm of the waves instead of the rush of the world. Back then, beach cottages stood where hotels now rise, and bonfires burned well into the night as the sea hummed in the distance. You could hear the faint strum of guitars carried by the wind, blending with the sound of gentle surf. It was peaceful, almost sacred, a slice of Texas coast untouched by time or noise. Then, the 1980s came, and so did spring break. The calm gave way to crowds, music, and neon-lit nights that never seemed to end. Hotels replaced cottages, and beach bonfires turned into parties that lasted until dawn. The wild energy brought life and loss. Today, South Padre balances between both worlds, the tranquil mornings of its past and the noisy pulse of its present. When the crowds leave and the sand cools, the island exhales, remembering the peaceful days it once knew. Santa Cruz, California has always been a place of motion. Surfboards, roller coasters, and the endless roll of the Pacific. In its golden years, the wooden boardwalk buzzed with laughter, the scent of salt and cotton candy swirling under a perfect blue sky. The beach boardwalk was a playground of the West, where families and dreamers came to chase the sun. The sound of carousel music echoed across the sand, while the giant Dipper roller coaster roared like thunder above the surf. Teenagers shared first kisses under the pier, and local surf legends carved waves that seemed to stretch to the horizon. The entire town pulsed with the carefree rhythm of California's youth, wild, bright, and unstoppable. The music of carousel organs drifted down the shoreline, and teenagers lined up for corn dogs and Ferris wheel rides that seemed to touch the clouds. But as California grew crowded and trends shifted, Santa Cruz became more of a memory than a destination. The boardwalk still stands, creaking softly, its lights flickering at dusk like a living photograph. Walk along the sand at sunset and you'll hear the echo of those endless summers, the cheers, the surf, and the laughter that never truly left. Santa Cruz isn't gone. It's just resting in the rhythm of the waves. Pismo Beach, California was once the definition of a perfect California postcard. Rolling dunes, lazy surfers, and families crowding the pier with ice cream cones in hand. In the 1950s, it was the kind of place you'd pull over for on a coastal drive and never want to leave. The air smelled like salt, sunscreen, and fried clams from the old cafes that lined the road. Surfers paddled out against golden sunsets, while classic cars cruised along the cliffs above the water. Back then, Pismo wasn't trying to be glamorous. It was simple, sunny, and full of heart. But time and tourism changed California's map. Bigger, glossier towns stole the spotlight. Malibu, Santa Barbara, Carmel, and Pismo became a quiet side note. The souvenir shops aged, the motels faded, and the crowds thinned to a whisper. Yet, that's exactly what gives it its soul now. When the fog drifts over the pier and the gulls cry above the waves, Pismo feels untouched, a glimpse of what California used to be before fame and fortune found its shores. Its beauty now lies not in its polish, but in its peace. For those who remember the old coast, Pismo Beach is still there, waiting patiently, as calm and timeless as the tide. Redondo Beach, California, was once the kind of place you saw on family vacation postcards, kids with sandy feet, parents under striped umbrellas, and fishermen hauling up the day's catch along the wooden pier. In the 1960s and 1970s, it was the working family's dream getaway, more modest than Malibu, but just as magical. The laughter of children mixed with the crackle of transistor radios playing the Beach Boys, and the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and sunscreen. Redondo was small-town warmth wrapped in Pacific sunshine. But as Los Angeles grew and luxury took over the coastline, Redondo was quietly left behind. Its simple charm didn't fit the image of the new California. The pier, once buzzing with arcades and diners, now feels like a memory replaying in slow motion. The families are gone, replaced by joggers and locals who come for the peace more than the fun. Still, in the right light, Redondo glows with its old energy. The ocean hasn't changed. The waves still crash the same way they did 50 years ago. It's not forgotten, just older, humbler, and waiting for people who still appreciate the beauty of something that doesn't need to change. Long Beach, California used to shimmer with promise, a seaside escape where glamour met adventure. In the early and mid-20th century, The Pike Amusement Zone was the pride of the city, packed with roller coasters, Ferris wheels, and dance halls that blazed with neon after dark. Couples strolled along the boardwalk under strings of lights, and the Queen Mary docked nearby, a floating symbol of class and luxury. But over time, the laughter faded into the hum of industry. The carnival closed, the oceanfront grew quieter, and the scent of salt gave way to the faint tang of oil and machinery. Long Beach transformed from playground to port, its personality traded for progress. Still, traces of its beauty remain if you look closely. A mural on a brick wall, a weathered pier, the glint of sunset on the harbor. The city has learned to live between nostalgia and necessity, balancing cranes and cargo with art walks and ocean views. Long Beach isn't what it was, but it never lost its pulse. Beneath the concrete and commerce, you can still hear the echo of carousel music if you listen to the wind. Cannon Beach, Oregon has always felt like a dream carved in fog. Families once flocked here every summer, kids flying kites along the cold shore, parents bundled in sweatshirts against the wind, and everyone stopping for clam chowder at the same tiny cafe year after year. The beach stretched wide and wild, framed by pine-covered cliffs and the great monolith of Haystack Rock rising from the sea like something ancient. Back then, Cannon Beach was unpretentious, a coastal secret where life slowed down to the rhythm of the tide. But as the years passed, the world grew louder, faster, more digital, and Cannon stayed still. The crowds thinned, the souvenir shops turned quiet, and the beach became a place for reflection instead of recreation. That quiet became its charm. Artists, writers, and wanderers now come not for noise but for peace, for misty mornings where the horizon disappears and time feels suspended. The ocean here doesn't shout, it whispers. And in those whispers, you can still hear the laughter of families from decades past, carried away on the wind, but never truly gone. Ocean Shores, Washington was supposed to be the next great American resort. The Palm Springs of the Pacific, the billboards promised in the 1960s. Investors poured in, imagining luxury hotels, golf courses, and celebrities strolling along windswept beaches. The streets were mapped, the houses built, and the dreams sold to families looking for the good life by the ocean. For a moment, it worked. Music filled the air, vacationers filled the motels, and the future looked bright. But then the storms came, both literal and economic. The town never quite reached the glittering heights it promised. The crowds stopped growing, the hotels aged, and Ocean Shores settled into something simpler, quieter. Today, it's a town frozen between ambition and nostalgia, a reminder that not every dream needs to come true to matter. The ocean still roars, the air still smells like salt and pine, and the sunsets still paint the horizon in colors no billboard could ever capture. Ocean Shores didn't become the Palm Springs of the Pacific, but it became something better, a humble, enduring corner of the coast where time slows and the sea always keeps its promise. Maison Blanche was not just a department store, it was a southern landmark dressed in marble and tradition. Nestled in the heart of New Orleans, its grand columns and ornate detailing whispered stories of elegance from another time. For decades, Maison Blanche stood as a beacon of hospitality and high style, where white-gloved attendants welcomed every guest with a gentle smile and a gracious, "Good morning?" Inside, it smelled like powder and pralines. The air was soft with perfume and the displays shimmered with gold and lace. You went to Maison Blanche not just to buy a dress, but to feel like you mattered. Its Canal Street flagship was more than a building, it was a civic symbol, woven into the soul of New Orleans like jazz in the quarter. There were parades outside and weddings inside. Birthdays were celebrated at the counter, and Christmas meant a visit to Mr. Bingle, their beloved snowman mascot. But as chain retailers closed in and tastes changed, the store lost its footing. Mergers chipped away at its identity until the name itself vanished. What does it say when a place so full of spirit becomes a footnote in a brochure? Farrell's Ice Cream Parlor was not a restaurant. It was an event. Walk into any Farrell's and you were met with a symphony of chaos. Waiters in candy-striped vests, marching drums, birthday horns, and people singing like it was opening night on Broadway. The floor shook with excitement. Kids screamed with joy. And at the center of it all was ice cream. Mountains of it. The Pig's Trough Sundae was the crown jewel, a massive dessert piled high with scoops of every flavor and toppings galore. And if you finished it solo? They rang a bell and brought the whole place to a standstill. It was part show, part sugar rush, and 100% unforgettable. Parents endured it for their kids. Kids loved it like it was Disneyland. But as the years went by, the charm faded. Maybe it was the noise. Maybe it was the cost. Or maybe people just stopped wanting their birthday to sound like a fire drill. Farrell's slowly melted away, leaving behind only echoes of whipped cream and clanging bells. And now that we have shouted ourselves hoarse with birthday songs, let us take it down a notch, because our next stop is as cozy as a cup of diner coffee on a rainy Pacific Northwest morning. The go-kart track with zero safety rules looked like it was built by someone who once saw a racetrack in a dream and then tried to recreate it with duct tape and a prayer. The sign out front read, "Family Fun." But you knew this was Dad's kind of fun. He paid cash to a man with a sunburn and a clipboard, and before you knew it, you were strapping into a plastic rocket with wheels. No seatbelt, no helmet, just a stern warning. Do not hit your sister. Dad, of course, was already in his own cart, revving the engine like it was the Daytona 500. The track was a cracked loop with grass growing through it and tires stacked too high as a boundary. The exhaust fumes were strong enough to water your eyes, and the cart screeched like a choir of angry lawnmowers. You skidded, bumped, and spun out more than once, but you never forgot the thrill. Especially when Dad passed you on the last lap, one hand on the wheel, the other waving smugly. That victory lap? It lasted all week, and if you were lucky, he would let you stay just a little longer, because the community swap meet down at the church lot was about to open, and Dad never missed that one. Geno's Hamburgers was a mid-Atlantic icon. With its bold red signs and sports tie-ins, it stood out in a crowded fast food landscape. Kids loved the burgers, adults loved the prices, and everybody loved the connection to football legend Gino Marchetti, who co-founded the chain after retiring from the NFL. It was fast, friendly, and local. In cities like Baltimore and Philadelphia, it was as common as traffic. But Geno's had ambitions beyond the region. It wanted to go national. What felt like a hometown treasure did not always translate outside the neighborhood. The farther it spread, the more it lost the charm that made it matter. The problem was the rest of the country already had their go-to burger joints. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. Geno's tried to differentiate. It added Kentucky Fried Chicken to its menu through a partnership. It redesigned stores. But growth was slow. The charm that worked in Baltimore did not translate in California. By the 1980s, Marriott had bought the chain and converted most of the locations into Roy Rogers. Just like that, Geno's was gone. The buildings changed, the signs came down, and a local legend faded into memory. But for those who grew up with it, Geno's was never just a burger. It was home. Best Products was the strangest, most brilliant shopping experience America ever forgot. You did not walk into a Best, you discovered it. Some stores had facades that peeled open like puzzle boxes. One looked like it had been broken in half. Another let trees grow right through the building. And inside, it was a treasure hunt, a showroom of possibility. Catalogs in hand, shoppers wandered a maze of displays, everything from stereos to sofas to science kits. You placed your order, then waited. Like magic, your item would appear, gliding down a conveyor belt from the mysterious warehouse beyond. Best was not just a store, it was theater. It made shopping feel futuristic, like you were participating in something just a little more clever than the average strip mall run. But its quirkiness was also its curse. As retail shifted toward big box convenience and immediate gratification, Best's charm started to feel like a delay. Slowly, the catalog orders stopped. The doors shut. The magic faded, and the buildings, those architectural marvels, were repurposed, gutted, forgotten. How did we lose something so boldly original without even noticing? Clancy's Hamburgers was not flashy, but that was exactly the point. This Midwestern chain was a tribute to the good old days. Think 1950s diner vibes with a 1980s sensibility. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and jukeboxes that never worked quite right. The menu was simple: hamburgers, fries, shakes, and maybe a tenderloin sandwich if you were feeling wild. But the flavor? Solid, dependable. The kind of burger that made you feel like everything was going to be just fine, even if you still had homework due. Clancy's peaked during the Reagan era, when families were looking for a bit of nostalgia with their ketchup. The chain kept it local, tight, and grounded, mostly popping up in Indiana and surrounding states. While national giants expanded aggressively, Clancy's stayed close to home. That was part of its charm, and maybe part of its downfall. Eventually, as tastes shifted and bigger players took over the burger scene, Clancy's began to disappear. But it never truly left the hearts of the folks who grew up on its milkshakes and diner tunes. If Clancy's was the taste of Americana, our next stop had a flavor all its own. Crunchy, spicy, and bright red as a fire truck, all straight out of the streets of Los Angeles. The small-town airport was barely an airport at all. A cracked runway, 2 hangars, and a chain-link fence with holes big enough to stick your face through. But Dad? He treated it like Kennedy Space Center. He would park the car at the edge of the lot, pop the hood up just enough for shade, and sit with a root beer balanced on the hood like he was waiting for clearance to launch. You joined him, legs swinging off the bumper, eyes on the horizon. Cessnas came and went, some buzzing overhead like dragonflies, others taxiing so slow it felt like they were afraid to leave the ground. "That one's a Skyhawk," Dad would say, as if naming a friend. "Twin engine, listen to the pitch." You nodded, pretending to hear the difference. Every now and then someone would land rough, and Dad would let out a low whistle. Bet he felt that one. The sun dipped lower. The planes grew fewer. But the quiet stuck with you, the feeling that for a few minutes the sky belonged to you. And when Dad said, "Let's stop by the photo shop on the way home," you knew the magic was about to get printed. Plymouth was never the flashiest name on the road, but it was trusted, reliable, American. It was the car your uncle fixed up in the driveway, the station wagon that took families to the Grand Canyon, the compact that young drivers learned to parallel park with. In the 1970s, Plymouth had already seen better days, but there was still hope. Then the market shifted. Gas prices spiked, Japanese imports hit harder and faster than anyone expected, and Plymouth's offerings started to feel outdated. Chrysler focused its attention elsewhere. Dodge got the performance, Chrysler got the luxury, and Plymouth got what was left. People still bought them, but it felt like settling. You were not proud to drive a Plymouth. You were just glad it still ran. Sales dipped. Innovation stalled. Even iconic models like the Duster could not save the brand. The writing was on the wall. By the 1990s, Plymouth was a forgotten middle child, unloved and unnecessary. In 2001, Chrysler officially pulled the plug. For decades, Plymouth had been a quiet part of the American story. And now, it is a footnote. But the memories remain, in faded photos, old commercials, and the sound of an engine that will not come back. This was pure spectacle. It was more than just a department store, it was a show. The kind where the windows danced at Christmas, where the escalators felt like magic carpets, where elegance was not just sold, it was performed. Based in Pennsylvania, Hess's knew how to make shopping feel like a celebration. The clothes sparkled, the displays turned heads, and the restaurant upstairs? Legendary. Mothers in their Sunday best would bring their children for a treat, teaching them that stores could be destinations, not just errands. Hess's knew the value of a good impression. In the 70s and 80s, it stood for fashion, fun, and a bit of fantasy. Then came the slow crumble. Ownership changed hands, the sparkle dimmed, and what was once a jewel of community pride became just another ghost of retail past. How do you say goodbye to a place that once made you feel so alive? Beefsteak Charlie's did not want you to just eat. They wanted you to feast. This was the kind of place that dared you to come hungry, then dared you again to leave room for dessert. Their tagline was, "You're gonna get spoiled," and honestly, they meant it. With a full salad bar, all-you-can-eat shrimp, and unlimited sangria, beer, and wine, it was less a dinner and more a challenge. The vibes? Equal parts wood-paneled steakhouse and slightly buzzed family reunion. People went for birthdays, promotions, divorces, any excuse to eat until your waistband begged for mercy. And the food? Surprisingly solid. The steak was not exactly filet mignon, but it hit the spot. The shrimp came fast and endless. And the bread? Warm, crusty, and forgettable. But who was there for bread? Beefsteak Charlies rode the wave of 80s extravagance until the bottom line caught up with them. Too much generosity and not enough foot traffic sealed its fate. But in its heyday, it was a buffet fever dream come to life. So if you thought that was decadent, just wait. The next restaurant stripped the glitz and turned hot dogs and tacos into a Southern California classic, with a name that only made sense once you saw the menu. It was not advertised. It was not even on a main road. Just a crooked wooden sign and a driveway that dipped behind an overgrown hedge. But if Dad tapped the wheel twice and said, "Here we are," you knew it was magic. The model train store in the back of someone's garage was no bigger than a single-car stall, but inside, it felt like a kingdom. Shelves were packed to the rafters with tiny train cars, tracks, tunnels, even tiny trees with even tinier squirrels. The air smelled like dust and old metal, the kind of smell that never leaves your coat. You would lean in to watch the train circle a miniature mountain range while Dad made small talk with the gray-haired man in suspenders, who clearly ran the whole operation on nothing but love and nostalgia. "This one's from 1952, the man would say, handing Dad a coal car like it was a rare coin. You did not know what made it special. You just knew Dad's eyes lit up in that way he saved for fishing trips and baseball games. It was not just a store. It was a secret clubhouse for grown men who still believed in toy engines and pretend towns. And if you think that was charming, wait until you smell what comes next. Free popcorn at the furniture store. Schiaparelli perfumes once lived in the same breathless league as Chanel and Dior. With their surrealist bottles and bold floral compositions, they brought high fashion to the dressing tables of everyday American women. It was not just a scent, it was a statement. In the 1970s, Schiaparelli's legacy still lingered, but America was shifting. Fashion was getting younger, louder, and more synthetic. The brand struggled to adapt. Department stores gave shelf space to trendier, punchier names. The old-world elegance of Schiaparelli felt out of step in a decade of disco and denim. And somewhere along the way, the company let go of its American foothold. Licensing fell apart. Distribution waned. What had once been a symbol of European sophistication became something whispered about in vintage shops. Women who once dabbed it on before dinner parties now found their favorite scents discontinued, forgotten. For some, it was just a bottle, but for others, it was identity. A sense of self wrapped in rose and bergamot, and losing that, quietly, without warning, felt like losing a part of the woman they once were. Caldor was quiet confidence, a discount store with taste. It never screamed at you with neon signs or carnival-like sales. Instead, it offered value in a calm, dignified way. Walk through the doors, and everything felt in order. The layout was smart, the prices were fair, the brands surprisingly good. For families in the Northeast, Caldor was the go-to for almost everything. You could buy a warm winter coat and matching mittens, pick up light bulbs, and browse the electronics aisle, all without fighting through chaos. Caldor was where fathers bought toolkits they actually used, and mothers found tasteful decor that did not cost a paycheck. Kids loved the toy aisle, bright, clean, and just adventurous enough. The clerks knew the regulars. You could ask questions and get real answers. It felt like shopping for adults, honest and efficient. But then came the tidal wave. Big box superstores with deeper discounts and endless inventory. Walmart, Target, the giants. And slowly, Caldor's calm faded under pressure. Budgets tightened, shelves thinned, and eventually the chain folded. The sign came down, the lights turned off, and the neighborhoods it served were left with louder, colder options. Caldor may not have had a catchphrase or a commercial jingle, but it had heart, and that was more than enough. Why does dignity always seem to lose in the age of excess? York Steakhouse was the quiet kind of magic that only made sense if you grew up in the golden era of mall culture. You know, the kind where the smell of leather shoes from the department store mixed with the warm scent of sizzling steak. This was the place where a nice dinner meant standing in line with a tray like it was a cafeteria, only this cafeteria had thick red carpets and faux mahogany everything. You grabbed your utensils from a bucket, picked out your cut of meat from a chalkboard menu, and settled into one of those heavy booths with a linen napkin that made you feel like royalty. There was something weirdly comforting about eating steak while sitting under fluorescent lights next to a plant that looked like it hadn't been watered since 1977. York was where people went to feel fancy on a budget, but as malls started shrinking and food courts took over, York Steakhouse quietly faded into the background. Still, for anyone who ever dipped their roll into a side of au jus, the memory sticks. Now, what if your family wanted a little more spice than steak? You probably ended up here. The canoe rental shack by the creek was not a business so much as a suggestion. A crooked sign, 3 boats tied to a tree, and a man named Gary who might have been there since 1948. Dad would slap a 20 into Gary's hand and say, "We'll be back in a couple hours," like it was no big deal. No forms, no helmets, no waiver. Just a paddle, a life vest that definitely had not been certified since Eisenhower, and you, wobbling into a canoe while Dad shoved you off the bank with one foot. Once you got going, though, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you realize just how loud life usually is. Birds overhead, water slapping against the side, and Dad telling the same story about how he once saw a snapping turtle the size of a garbage can. You never saw one, but you wanted to. You learned how to steer, sort of, and how to duck when you went under a low branch too late. You got soaked, you laughed, and when you finally dragged the canoe back onto dry land, Dad would clap you on the shoulder like you had just completed Navy SEAL training. But if that creek showed you the earth, the next place aimed a little higher, right up into the stars. The Pontiac Aztek was a disaster in the early 2000s, but its roots stretch back to the 1970s. Back then, car designers were quietly sketching new ideas, crossovers, hybrid shapes, something between a van and an SUV. The oil crisis had made the auto industry rethink everything. What if utility and economy could live in the same shell? Those early concepts never left the drawing board, but they stayed in the shadows, mutating over time. Somewhere between vision and reality, the design lost its soul. What rolled out of the factory felt more like compromise than innovation. And when the market finally seemed ready for something different, Pontiac pulled the trigger. What came out was the Aztek. It was bold. It was weird. It was ahead of its time, and somehow behind it. The angles were wrong. The plastic cladding was cheap, and the name sounded like a dare. Consumers recoiled, sales tanked, and Pontiac, already in trouble, never really recovered. But behind the jokes, behind the Breaking Bad memes and design flops, there was something sad about it all. The Aztek was born from good intentions, from a desire to break the mold and recapture relevance. Instead, it became a punchline. Proof that even bold ideas, especially bold ideas, can fail spectacularly. Gimbel's was the city's second favorite, but first in our hearts. Overshadowed by Macy's, it never quite got the glory. But Gimbel's had grit. It had soul. Where Macy's sparkled, Gimbel's grounded. Its Thanksgiving parade came first. Its windows were full of wonder. When you walked through its doors, you didn't feel intimidated. You felt welcomed. It was the kind of place where children pressed their noses to snowy glass in winter, watching elves move on little motors and wooden toys dance in perfect rhythm. It was where your parents met on a lunch break, or where you got your ears pierced, or where Grandma worked behind the glove counter for 20 years. The ceilings were high, the marble scuffed, and the escalators slow. But that was the charm. Every floor had its story. The basement had deals. The top floor had class. The middle? That's where the memories lived. Gimbel's was an anchor of routine, joy, and city life. But like many department stores, it was caught in a changing tide. Fast fashion, discount giants, and the rise of suburban malls pulled the rug out. And soon the parades ended, the windows went dark, and the neon sign flickered off one last time. The space it held in the skyline was replaced, but the space it held in our lives, irreplaceable. How did we forget the store that remembered us? Kenny Rogers Roasters was part restaurant, part marketing miracle. Sure, it launched in the early 1990s, but for kids growing up in the late 80s, it became one of their first tastes of what the grown-ups called eating healthy. It all started when country legend Kenny Rogers teamed up with a former Kentucky Fried Chicken executive to create a rotisserie chicken empire. The idea was simple: give folks a fast food experience without the grease and guilt. The chicken was juicy, slow-cooked, and served alongside baked beans, corn muffins, and coleslaw. It was comforting without being heavy, and the restaurant interiors had that clean, polished look of a country kitchen turned upscale cafeteria. But what really immortalized Kenny Rogers Roasters in pop culture was Seinfeld. An episode featured the restaurant as a literal beacon of red neon light, disrupting Kramer's sleep and setting off a hilarious chain of events. That spotlight helped, but it could not keep the chain afloat. Eventually, the brand fizzled in the US, even as it thrived overseas. Still, if you ever sat down with a tray of rotisserie chicken and Kenny's smiling face printed on your napkin, you know it was special. And from one Southern icon to another, our next stop traded the spotlight for something far more soulful: mason jars, cornbread, and country cookin' with a drawl. The camera and film shop was a cathedral of forgotten technology. You walked in, and the air smelled like chemicals and time. Behind the counter, rows of yellow Kodak envelopes waited like tiny mysteries. Dad would head straight for the slide carousel projectors, lifting one like it was a sacred artifact. "Kodachrome," he would whisper. "They just don't make colors like that anymore." You did not know what he meant, but you believed it. You spun the projector just to hear the satisfying click, click, click of slides falling into place. There were shelves of lenses, tripods, flash bulbs in boxes older than you, and glass cases of second-hand cameras that looked more like museum pieces. Dad talked shop with the clerk, dropping words like aperture and ISO like he was reading from scripture. You picked up a Polaroid and tried to figure out how it worked. The clerk let you snap one. The photo came out blurry, overexposed, but it still felt like magic. Dad bought a roll of film, maybe 2, even though he already had 6 at home. "Just in case," he would say, "just in case the light hit right." And on the drive home, with the bag of film in his lap, he would say, "One quick stop." That stop? A smoky little pool hall where you got a taste of grown-up cool, even if just for one night. In the 1970s, Vivitar cameras were everywhere. They were not the fanciest, but they worked. They captured birthday parties, backyard barbecues, and road trips to Mount Rushmore. They were affordable, sturdy, and proudly American. For amateur photographers, Vivitar was a ticket to creativity. But behind the shutters and flashbulbs, the world was changing. Japan was coming fast with brands like Nikon, Canon, and Minolta. Their lenses were sharper, their designs sleeker, and their technology more advanced. Vivitar could not keep up. It tried to pivot, offering accessories, licensing deals, and budget versions of premium cameras. Every shelf they lost in a department store was one less memory they would help capture. They were not just losing market share, they were losing their place in the family album. But the market was ruthless. Film was expensive, competition was brutal, and Vivitar slowly fell out of focus. By the time digital cameras arrived, it was too late. What once filled shelves at Sears and Montgomery Ward now sat in garage sales and thrift stores. Forgotten. But ask anyone who grew up in the 1970s to show you their old photo albums. Odds are, a Vivitar helped make those memories. A camera might just be a tool, but for millions of Americans, Vivitar was how they remembered their lives. Rich's was more than just a store to Atlanta. It was the city's beating heart during the holidays. Every year, crowds would gather beneath the flickering lights of the department store's enormous Christmas tree, hoisted high atop its downtown roof. There was a magic to it. As snow machines pumped flakes into southern skies, you could feel the hum of shared wonder. Riches brought families together at the Pink Pig monorail, through its iconic Magnolia Room tea room, or just under the warm glow of its holiday windows. But even outside of December, Riches held weight. It was where Southern charm met civic pride. The salespeople knew your name. The clerks would wrap gifts with care and tie the bows just right. Kids bought their first suits there. Brides picked out silver, and everything, from linens to love letters, was laced with a quiet dignity. When the store was absorbed into Macy's in the early 2000s, something unspoken disappeared with it. Not just the building, not just the brand. A piece of Atlanta's soul faded into memory. When did convenience become more important than tradition? If these forgotten seaside escapes stirred up your own memories of salt air and summer freedom, share your favorite coast in the comments. Drop a like to keep the waves rolling and subscribe so you never miss our next trip back to America's lost shores.